Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is April 18th, 2016. The show is being pre-recorded on April the 17th, 2016, and we're going to talk about a number of different issues tonight. It's going to be a bit back and forth. We're going to jump back and forth between different topics because we're just going to approach it that way tonight. Now, the show can be found every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at ucy.tv, and you can access the show's personal webpage, ucy.tv/TT, for Truth on the Tracks. And if you want to keep track of my work, then I am a regular writer for activistpost.com, naturalblaze.com, eraofwisdom.org, and of course my own website, BrandonTurbeville.com. And that last website, BrandonTurbeville.com, is the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, all the archives of this show. All of the books are there as well. And we're proud to announce that The Road to Damascus, the Anglo-American Assault on Syria, finally is now available on Amazon.com. We'll get the Kindle version up this week as well. So we're slow going on getting the older books up on Amazon, but we're going to get it done, and hopefully very soon, now that we've got the process underway, that these things are going to hurry up and be finished. And of course, we'll have some more products and so forth coming out in the near future. So BrandonTurbeville.com is where you want to go to follow my work, all of my work specifically, and some of the things that we've got going on. Social media links there as well. Follow me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, at Brandon Turb is the Twitter handle, but follow me on both of those outlets. Now, just briefly, I want to mention that we've got some positive news coming out of California, out of Napa County, California. You've heard me talk about this guy before. James Hinton is running for Napa County Board of Supervisors, District 2. And he's using a lot of the platform points that we have promoted here on this show. Not all. We disagree probably on a few things, but by and large, a lot of the platform points that we've discussed here on this show. James has repeatedly opposed GMOs, and he's argued for GMO labeling and GMO bans, but labeling also. And recently, I've done an article on this, naturalblaze.com and BrandonTurbeville.com. California County Board candidate slams GMOs and opponents in debate. He was not afraid to raise that issue during the County Board of Supervisors debate held in April 2016. The article says 2015. I believe that is a mistake. It is April 2015. So, we have this world of corporate politics. It's rare to even hear the GMO issue being brought up, much less seeing them debated in a County Board of Supervisors debate. Especially, it is rare to see them so passionately opposed, but this is exactly what James did. He took aim at both the GMOs and Supervisor Luce. This is what Hinton says. This is a quote. It says, Supervisor Luce denied the will of the public. We were 15-0 in support of this letter, and he said we must remove the words and state and submit this. He would only support federal labeling, which we all know is never going to happen, which 535 people there aren't going to agree on this, so they're so far away from it. There's 120 in the state of California legislature that are much closer to doing this, and we would have been much better to go with the state support. The fact that he denied 15-0 unanimous support kind of killed the bill. So that's what he has to say. Basically what he's arguing is that Luce, when the issue was coming up for labeling GMOs, he argued to remove the words and state and submit the bill, right? Because it would have relied only on the federal legislation, so it would have complied essentially with federal labeling. But if the state did it, it was it would not have applied according to the county legislature. So basically, what they're trying to do is they would have been trying to cripple the GMO labeling bill. But James Hinton has opposed that, and he gave a passionate defense of labeling GMOs, legislation to label GMOs, and he got a rapturous applause from the audience. So This is something that you don't see too often in these debates, and we're proud of James for speaking out against GMOs, and hopefully we're going to have him on the show in the future because he's been fighting for an end to the war on drugs, for cannabis freedom, for labeling genetically modified food, for raising the minimum wage, and a number of other fights as well. So we'll try to have him on the show to talk about his platform and his campaign in the near future. Now, just a quick discussion of the foreign situation, right? The foreign policy situation. We've got reports now that the CIA is reportedly discussing a plan to augment the fighting capability of the terrorists on the ground in Syria that they've been supporting since the beginning of the crisis in 2011. And the idea is that they're going to support these terrorists with even more modern more modern technology if the ceasefire agreement that's currently underway in Geneva falls apart. And the discussion really centers around the supply of weaponry that would help them better respond to the Syrian and Russian air forces. The discussions is centered around the possibility of sending a variety of anti-aircraft technologies that goes from man-pads to the less portable systems, including the Soviet era BM-21 Grad missiles. Now, we've got reports coming from the Wall Street Journal that the CIA has given provisional assurances to coalition members that they can expand support to forces fighting against the Syrian government if the ceasefire falls or fails and falls apart, and that full-scale fighting picks back up. Right, the U.S. is declaring the right to determine which weapons are going to be introduced to the battlefield as part of this program, but the assurance has been given that the expansion of aid can be given to these terrorist groups. So the discussions between the United States and these coalition members were apparently part of a plan that the Washington Post described as a Plan B for Syria if the ceasefire talks fell through and the fighting resumed. Now, we've got RT saying that on the eve of the ceasefire agreement coming into effect in Syria at midnight, February 27th, the heads of the Middle Eastern intelligence agencies met to lay out a plan for waging war after the truce, which they saw as something that was going to fall apart. And the consultations never stopped after that. So they're still ongoing. So according to the Wall Street Journal and Adam Intus, who's writing for them, that in most of those meetings, officials briefed on the deliberations said that coalition members received provisional assurances from the CIA that they would be given approval to expand support to Syria's moderate opposition, the shadowy, not existent, moderate opposition. And coalition members have agreed on the outlines of this so-called Plan B, but the White House is still saying that it wants to approve or disapprove of a list of specific Plan B weapon systems before they can be introduced to the battlefield. Now, officials, these unnamed officials that are being quoted here, said that the CIA has made it clear to their allies that the new systems, after it's agreed upon, would be given to the terrorists only if the truce and the current, political track, the Plan A, or what it's being called, would fall apart and full-scale fighting resumes, and then that is when these weapons can be given. The CIA spokesperson would not comment on the deliberations. The discussions of Plan B do come as representatives from the Syrian government and the so-called opposition prepare to resume in Geneva. And we've got the development of the weapons list is apparently, and this is reported by the Wall Street Journal, part of a broader behind-the-scenes effort by the Obama administration to deter its adversaries in the Syrian conflict while preventing the U.S.'s coalition partners who are supporting the moderate opposition from taking matters into their own hands, end quote. Well, let's unpack that a minute. The development of the weapons list is part of a broader behind-the-scenes effort by the Obama administration to deter its adversaries in the Syrian conflict. Well, who are the adversaries in the Syrian conflict? Well, according to the Obama administration, it's two people, really. Two organizations, the Syrian government and ISIS. Well, we know that the United States has supported and funded and directed and trained ISIS, so we can eliminate that from the list, and we can see that it's only the Syrian government. But privately, and not so publicly, it's sort of an open secret, who are the enemies in Syria? Well, it's Iran, it's Hezbollah, it's Russia. These are the enemies in Syria. So it's providing these weapons that are going to deter Russia and deter Iran and deter Hezbollah from continuing to fight against U.S. interests in Syria. That seems like a dangerous prospect, does it not? And the idea also is to prevent coalition partners who are supporting the moderate opposition, which doesn't exist. We should change moderate opposition to ISIS from taking matters into their own hands. In other words, wandering off the reservation. I wouldn't put too much stock in that, because this is all seems to be a coordinated effort anyway, although Turkey, or at least Erdogan, is starting to understand that there are ramifications to working with the United States. Now, a lot of experts, and these are experts that are quoted in the mainstream media, are saying that the terrorists mostly need technological assistance and electronic means to defeat and at least skirt Assad's military and air force. And for that purpose, the MANPADS, this stands for Man-Portable Air Defense Systems, are being brought up for discussion as a legitimate option for weapons assistance to terrorists on the ground in Syria, despite the fact that reports suggest the United States is hesitant to provide them. This is part of the discussion. So Turkey and Saudi Arabia are reportedly very eager to provide these portable systems. The United States is more hesitant. Yeah, we'll see. That's doubtful. The provision of MANPADS to Al-Qaeda and ISIS, basically it poses a number of threats to civilized people. First, if terrorists are in possession of the means with which to shoot down an aircraft from the ground, and that's what MANPADS exist for, then we've got a situation in which civilian passenger aircraft the world over is going to find itself in danger of being taken out of the sky as a result of terror attacks aimed at sensitive targets. And these passenger aircraft are sensitive targets, right? They're out there in the open. They're defenseless. So civilian passengers are going to be put at risk, since we have known terrorists and terrorist organizations in possession of powerful weaponry that's capable of bringing them out of the air from the ground. If terrorists are provided with MANPADS, and if a civilian airliner is really targeted as a result, it's got to be the United States and Turkey and Saudi Arabia who are held directly responsible for the death of innocent civilians. That is going to follow inevitably, and it will be inevitable. Now, another problem here is if the terrorist forces are in possession of a sizable armory of MANPADS, we have a new and greater threat to the Syrian Air Force, but also the Russian Air Force. So we've got, according to the Wall Street Journal, we've got U.S. officials already addressing this issue with their Russian counterparts, and they've done so in a manner that resembles a threat much more than it does a genuine discussion. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the U.S. officials have conveyed a private message to the Russians, quote, indicating that a return to full-scale fighting could end up putting more Russian pilots in danger. We've got a senior Obama administration official to Moscow, quoted by the Wall Street Journal: if the ceasefire collapses, if the negotiations don't go anywhere, and we're back to full-throttle civil war, all bets will be off. The outside patrons will double and triple down, throwing everything they can into Syria, including much more lethal weaponry. That's a threat to the Russians. The American position is a warning. It's a threat to the Russians that if the fighting resumes between the Syrian government and these phantom moderate rebels, protected terrorists, then the U.S. is going to resume its assistance to the terrorists. They're already assisting the terrorists now, but to resume and increase its assistance to the terrorists, and it's going to manifest itself in a way that threatens Russian pilots. That's a highly incendiary move, to say the least, since Russia's not likely to take a threat to its military personnel lightly. And it's not reasonable to believe that Russia is simply going to back down or stick to a business-as-usual method in regards to the shooting down of a Russian jet. Turkey has gotten quite the warning about that. And now terrorists in Syria have already had an access to a small number of man pads that the CIA claims they purchased, claims that the terrorists purchased through illicit channels, but many researchers do feel that they've actually been provided by the CIA, or at least Saudi Arabia or Turkey. So they're arguing that these guys bought these man pads from some type of black market, but the idea, the supposition here is that the CIA, or at least Saudi Arabia or Turkey, did provide them with a limited number of man pads to combat the Syrian and Russian air forces. The CIA, of course, refused to comment on this Plan B when they were asked to do so by Sputnik News, and it's not likely that they're going to be free to comment on many other aspects of the plan in the near future. Now, since we are discussing foreign policy, we're going to go into domestic policy heavily here in the rest of the show. But before we do, I want to make a transition, but I want to talk a bit about this question of treaties that I've been hearing some discussion about, this idea that treaties and things like the TPP, right, the agreements and so forth, that treaties supersede the Constitution in some way. There's an idea that a treaty somehow supersedes the Constitution, and that once a treaty is signed, that is not only the supreme law of the land, but that it is now somehow higher than the U.S. Constitution. And this is not true at all. I don't know. This is coming mainly from the historical precedent, and it's not really a precedent. It's the John Foster Dulles attitude. In 1952, I believe, there was a speech before the American Bar Association in Louisville, Kentucky, where he argued essentially that treaties make international law and they make domestic law, right? If I can find this quote, Dulles says, treaties make international law and they also make domestic law. Under our Constitution, treaties become the supreme law of the land. Treaties, for example, can take powers away from the Congress and give them to the federal government or to some international body. They can cut across the rights given to the people by the Constitutional Bill of Rights. That, my friends, is, of course, bullshit. And this is something that needs to be understood. The treaties do not supersede the Constitution. If you want to read some quotes, we can do that in a minute. But the idea is that the House of Representatives has no vote in treaties. That's a constitutional, or I guess we should say a congressional procedure. That's the way it's set up. House of Representatives doesn't vote regarding treaties. That in itself is an indication that treaties don't supersede the Constitution, since both houses have to pass an amendment or law. If you want to pass a law, it has to go to the House, be passed, it has to go to the Senate, and be passed. Then it has to be, harmonized between the two. If there's any differences, then it has to go to the President to be signed. In the case of treaties, the Senate deals with the passage of the treaty. Right? So essentially what we're saying here is that because the House of the Representatives doesn't have a vote, the House of Representatives has to pass a law. They have to vote on the constitutional amendments. But in treaties, they don't. They don't have a voice. This itself shows you that the idea of treaties do not supersede the Constitution. There are some agreements, particularly trade agreements, that are approved by both houses of Congress, but this includes that both houses are included because the Constitution mandates that Congress, the whole Congress, not just the Senate, regulates commerce with foreign nations. So if you have a situation in which there's a treaty that involves trade that actually would be overriding the portion of the Constitution that requires that Congress regulate commerce, delegation of congressional authority, the authority that's given specifically to Congress, is barred by the Constitution. But the idea in modern times is that trade agreements do transfer the power of the Congress to an international body. And you just heard what I read from John Foster Dulles, this idea that is the case. The real reason that the oligarchs are requiring that both houses vote on these trade agreements and treaties is that if sometime in the future that public pressure were actually awakened in some way to bring pressure on the government to stop or reject these trade pacts, since the Constitution gives the exclusive power to regulate foreign trade to the entire Congress, then any treaty, or I say exclusive power, it gives the power to regulate foreign trade to the Congress. The President is involved somewhat, and we don't want to minimize that. But any treaty at this point that regulates foreign trade would have to be rejected on the basis that the Constitution grants this power to the entire Congress, not just the Senate. But since they have both houses approving trade agreements instead of having the Senate approve trade agreements, the agreements created would still carry the weight of treaties, right? Because they're passed by both houses of Congress. So basically, these trade agreements that are ceding Congress's constitutional authority regarding commerce to an international body might not seem like that big of a deal to some people, but it represents the people of the United States, right? The Congress, as much as we often hate them, is supposed to represent the people of the United States. So you lose a lot of your rights over your own economy to an international power. And we can look at that World Trade Organization, the IMF, or the World Bank for an example to that. But since John Foster Dulles had made those comments, perhaps we should look at people, other individuals. Thomas Jefferson, and we've got our problems with Thomas Jefferson. But in September 1803, he says, "I say the same as to the opinion of those who consider the grant of the treaty-making power as boundless. If it is, then we have no Constitution." We also have quotes from other individuals. James Madison in 1787 says, "I do not conceive that power is given to the President and the Senate to dismember the empire or alienate any great essential right. I do not think the whole legislative authority have this power. The exercise of the power must be consistent with the object of the delegation." We've also got another Thomas Jefferson quote, right? "A manual of parliamentary practice" is where this comes from. "Surely the President and Senate cannot do by treaty what the whole government is interdicted from doing in any way, or interdicted from doing in any way." We've also got Alexander Hamilton, who was an opponent of Jefferson and was right on many issues. He says, Hamilton says, "A treaty cannot be made which alters the constitution of the country or which infringes any express exceptions to the power of the Constitution of the United States." So you've got Jefferson and Hamilton, who were fierce opponents on many, many issues, particularly economic. They are agreeing on this issue. Hamilton also said, "The only constitutional exception to the power of making treaties is that it shall not change the Constitution. On natural principles, a treaty which should manifestly betray or sacrifice primary interests of the state would be null." So, do you want to side with Jefferson and Hamilton, or do you want to side with John Foster Dulles? Well, clearly we can see where the benefits of side-taking lie in this issue, right? The idea that the Constitution is not superseded by foreign trade agreements or treaties. That should be clear enough by now to clear that up for anybody out there in the internet land who is not clear about that. Now, since we're back on the issue, the domestic issue, we've also want to talk about the election, since it seems that Bernie Sanders has gotten a little more fire, is not entirely the total wimp that he was. I suppose now that the nomination is safely out of his hands, he can be a little more forceful. After all, the Bernie Sanders supporters need him to act as a steam valve so they can go out and act out their anger against the corporate influence in the Democratic Party, complain about Hillary Clinton, blow off a bunch of steam, let the political revolution of the Bernie Sanders socialism die once the nomination is lost through all kinds of trickery and deceit and deception and theft in the Democratic Party, and outright disregard for Democratic voters and anyone taking part in the process. And once Hillary Clinton is the nominee, then the young Bernie supporters and the old Bernie supporters, the 60s leftovers, can just fall behind the Hillary Clinton machine, because after all, Hillary will be better than Donald Trump or Ted Cruz, right? That's how it's going to go, and we all know that. But we should do our due diligence in pointing out the importance of not supporting Hillary Clinton. And this is not an endorsement of Ted Cruz, not an endorsement of Donald Trump, not an endorsement of Bernie Sanders. We don't like any of those people, but Hillary Clinton seems to be the most dangerous one at this point. Now, so you never want an oligarch to fight you on their own terms. If the oligarchs want Hillary Clinton, then let's remove Hillary Clinton from the equation if we can, and do whatever else we can to fight the Plan B of the oligarchs. But you never want to let them attack you on their own time, on their own turf. So let's take a brief look, since we're talking domestically, about Hillary Clinton's civil liberties record. So by now, civil libertarians should be fully aware that if they're looking for a candidate that reflects their values, the best rule of thumb would be to find Hillary Clinton on the map of the political spectrum and then move in the opposite direction as far as you can go. Perhaps the most obvious bellwether of Clinton's respect and support for American civil liberties can be found in her support for the Patriot Act, the first one. Clinton wholeheartedly supported the passage of the Patriot Act in the days after 9/11. She voted for the act as a member of the U.S. Senate. 5 years later, she once again expressed support for the evisceration of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution by voting for the 2006 reauthorization of the Patriot Act. Now, in 2014, in April 2014, she appeared at the University of Connecticut, where she suggested that Edward Snowden, was guilty of treason, possibly working with the Russians and the Chinese. And even though her words weren't direct, her position was clear enough. We've got Clinton saying people were desperate to avoid another attack. And she's talking about her NSA spying programs. And I saw enough intelligence as a senator from New York, and then certainly as a Secretary of State, that this is a constant. There are people right this minute trying to figure out how to do harm to Americans and to other innocent people. So it was a debate that needs to happen so that we make sure we're not infringing on Americans' privacy, which is a valued, cherished personal belief that we have. But we also had to figure out how to get the right amount of security. She also said, when he emerged and when he absconded with all that material, I was puzzled because we have all these protections for whistleblowers. If he were concerned and wanted to be a part of the American debate, he could have been. But it struck me as, I just have to be honest with you, as sort of odd that he would flee to China because Hong Kong is controlled by China, and that he would then go to Russia, two countries with which we have very difficult cyber relationships, to put it mildly. Well, couple of things there. It's funny that she refers to privacy as a valued, cherished personal belief that we have. Sorry, witch. Privacy is not a valued, cherished personal belief. It's a right. It's a constitutional right that we have in the United States. It's called the Fourth Amendment. It's not a personal belief. Now, when she refers to the protections for whistleblowers, well, what protections? I guess Bradley Manning would disagree about the protections for whistleblowers. So anyway, Hillary has a clear conspiracy theory that it's Russia and China that were controlling Snowden to work against the United States. I guess this is part of her vast right-wing conspiracy that she talked about years ago when she was playing the victim then, as she plays the victim now. She says, I think turning over a lot of that material, intentionally or unintentionally drained, gave all kinds of information not only to big countries, but to networks and terrorist groups and the like. So I have a hard time thinking that somebody who is a champion of privacy and liberty has taken refuge in Russia under Putin's authority. She also says later that, and then he calls in to a Putin talk show and says, President Putin, do you spy on people? And Putin says, well, from one intelligence professional to another, of course not. Oh, thank you so much. I mean, really, I don't know. I have a hard time following it. That's what Clinton had to say. Now, Clinton has repeatedly refused to clearly state that spying on American citizens without a warrant is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. She's dodged any attempt to force her to provide a clear answer as to what her position on the NSA overreach might be. She continually refers to this as a really difficult balancing act. Tech journalist Kara Swisher asked her if she would throttle back NSA spying. Clinton responded that the NSA needs to be more transparent about what it's doing and that people felt betrayed, but she would not be specific. She says, I resist saying it has to be this or has to be that. So she wouldn't say she wouldn't spy. Now, she's not opposed to dragnet spying either on American citizens or individuals abroad, as her support for the Patriot Act should attest to. It was revealed by WikiLeaks cables in 2010 it was in 2010. It revealed that in 2009, Clinton personally ordered surveillance of a number of UN officials, including Ban Ki-moon, during her tenure as Secretary of State. And according to the released cables, Clinton wanted everything from the officials' online passwords to their DNA. Another cable that was released by WikiLeaks revealed that the U.S. State Department was aware and supportive of pressuring Spain to stop an independent Spanish judge from indicting 6 members of the Bush administration for torturing Spanish citizens at Guantanamo Bay. After those cables were released online and made public by WikiLeaks, Clinton's State Department ordered employees not to view or read the documents, despite the fact that the documents were public access and that they were declassified, freely available. The State Department threatened graduate students who were possibly considering applying for a job with the department that if they accessed the documents, it would, quote, call into question your ability to deal with confidential information, end quote. Very Orwellian. Let's talk about another sort of social pariah here. One of these wedge issues, flag burning. Right? That's an issue that's clearly protected under the U.S. Constitution and the First Amendment, the right to freedom of speech, right to freedom of expression. Clinton, even on this issue, has come down on the side of totalitarianism, which is, of course, ironic since this woman has absolutely no respect for the United States anyway. She doesn't mind getting soldiers killed. She doesn't mind doing any of that. But burning the flag, that she supports totalitarianism, of course, because freedom of speech and expression will always be a threat to Hillary Clinton and the oligarchy. So even though the Supreme Court ruled in 1989 that flag burning laws violated free speech, Clinton not only supported, but she introduced legislation to Congress in 2005 that would have made flag burning a federal crime. That same year, 2005, she launched an attack on video games. She attempted to pass the Family Entertainment Protection Act, which would have criminalized the sale of video games rated M or mature to minors. We need to treat violent video games the way we treat tobacco, alcohol, and pornography, she said. If you put it really simply, these violent video games are stealing the innocence of our children, and it is certainly making the job of being a parent even more difficult. I guess she should have added to that, quote, what we really prefer is to put them in a uniform, have them go kill innocent people overseas, get them killed, and that is a much better method, right, Hillary? She doesn't like violent video games, but sending people off to war and laughing at the murder of Gaddafi, that's somehow moral. Same year, Clinton called on the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, to investigate Grand Theft Auto because of the result of the hot coffee mod, whatever, the mini game with sexually explicit content contained within the game. And her whining and grandstanding resulted in the rating being changed to adults only, and ultimately the game was removed from the store shelves. She tried it again in 2007. She introduced similar legislation when she was gearing up for a presidential campaign. Now, of course, we know that violence in the media, particularly in television, movies, and video games, is undoubtedly a sign of the degradation of American culture, plays a major role in the further degradation of the culture. Cutting the throat of free speech, though, is no way to legitimate legitimate that process, right? There's no way to answer that problem. There's just no way to do it. You don't cut the throat of free speech. So coming from a woman who has supported, and I use that term lightly, who supported every war and the exercise of killing and murder and assassination and destruction of individuals and nations and cultures that she's ever been faced with in her entire career, her concern over video game violence should fall on deaf ears. Now, the question of working people and labor, that's something else that we should bring up about the Wicked Witch of the West. In general, Clinton's silence as a lawyer and corporate board member, backstage coaching as the First Lady, and her votes as a senator, policies as Secretary of State, positions as a candidate for president in 2016, all lead to one conclusion: that she's clearly a member of the aristocratic class, and that she's an enemy of the poor and working class in the United States. She's firmly in the grips of Wall Street, and as such, she's firmly anti-labor. At least she's anti-labor any and everywhere except for the campaign trail. You'd think she was a union coal miner if you listen to her speeches, but if you look at anything else, then you can see that she's clearly anti-labor. Her close connections with Wall Street banks and major corporations aside, we gotta point out that her role as a Walmart corporate board member, where she quote unquote remained silent about the attempt by the corporation to fight unions and remove the possibility of collective bargaining from Walmart employees, that stands as one important instance in her career. There's an article written by Kevin Young and Diana C. Becerra, maybe, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Something that might be called a neocon, Hillary Clinton and corporate feminism. Sums it up pretty well. Let me read Young and Becerra. Hillary Clinton's record on such issues is hardly encouraging. Her decades of service on corporate boards and in major policy roles as First Lady, U.S. Senator, and Secretary of State give a clear indication of where she stands. One of Clinton's first high-profile public positions was at Walmart, where she served on the board from 1986 to 1992. She remained silent in board meetings as her company waged a major campaign against labor unions seeking to represent store workers, as an ABC review of video recordings later noted. Clinton recounted in her 2003 book that Walmart CEO Sam Walton taught me a great deal about corporate integrity and success. Though she later began trying to shed her public identification with the company in order to attract labor support for her Senate and presidential candidacies, Walmart executives have continued to look favorably on her, with Alice Walton donating the maximum amount to the Ready for Hillary Super PAC in 2013. Walton's $25,000 contribution was considerably higher than the average annual salary for Walmart's hourly employees, 2/3 of whom are women. End quote. So, in regards to her remaining silent on Walmart's war on labor and labor unions while she served on the Walmart corporate board, it appears that Clinton did much more than simply remain silent. She was, interestingly enough, the first woman to serve on the board of Walmart. The Village Voice pointed out in 2000 that as they were denouncing Clinton's Walmart past, that her spot on the board was designed just for her. She wasn't filling any open vacancies. The company didn't replace her seat when she resigned in 92. Her ties to Walmart were not confined to her role on the board either. Walmart was one of Rose's clients, and according to 1994 New York Times article, Hillary served as director for the firm's representation of Walmart. Now, in 2007, the New York Times reported that during her time on the board, Clinton pushed for greater representation for women in the company's management, and she led an advisory group that focused on ways Walmart could improve its environmental practices. But during a shareholder meeting the year after she joined the company, Walton said they'd added a strong-willed young lady on the board now who has already told the board it should do more to ensure the advancement of women. Okay, but on unionization, the primary complaint against Walmart, among many actually, I shouldn't say primary, there are many complaints against Walmart, but on the issue of unionization, she had very little to say. 2008 ABC review of videotapes from Walmart meetings found that she remained silent as Walmart waged this major campaign against labor unions. She was not a dissenter. One of her fellow board members told the Los Angeles Times in 2007 that she was not a dissenter. She was part of those decisions. So she helped wage a war on labor. And even while Bill Clinton served as the governor of Arkansas, the Clintons, due to Hillary's position on the board, traveled for free on the Walmart corporate jet 14 times in the time span between 1990 and 1991. Bill was a widespread defender of Walmart during his tenure as governor, and this is, of course, not surprising since Bill depended on Walmart for funding his campaigns on the state and federal level. So Hillary's connections to anti-union sentiment and anti-union practices extend far beyond her connections to Walmart, because during the course of her failed 2008 run for presidency, Hillary employed a man by the name of Mark Penn, one of her top political strategists. Penn had been close to Clinton since 1995. He worked with the Clintons in a number of different capacities, ranging from pollster to counselor, and I put that in quotes. But Penn was a powerful figure in public relations and research in that world. Penn became the CEO of a company called Burson Marsteller Incorporated, and he worked with major corporations like Microsoft, Pfizer, and Shell Oil. One of the most controversial aspects of his business, from the leftist perspective at least, was the category of labor relations. Right, that's a traditional euphemism for suppressing workers and their right to organize. So before he eliminated the website for that company, it advertised this specialty and noted the firm's capacity to confront organized labor's, let me read the quote, organized labor's coordinated campaigns, whether they are in conjunction with organizing or contract negotiating, end quote. So it's not the most graceful wording, but the idea is clear enough. So we've also got another article by Mark Schmidt for the American Prospect that it went a little bit further about this. He says that Clinton's top advisor, that's Penn, says, the company says, quote, companies cannot be caught unprepared by organized labor's coordinated campaigns, whether they are in conjunction with organizing or contracting negotiations. That is why we have developed a comprehensive communications approach for clients when they face any type of labor situation, end quote. Even on the question of minimum wage, though, Clinton has skirted progressive economics, right? And instead, from any sensible economics program like the American system, for instance, Clinton ran away as if her life depended on it. So while she has come out in support of raising the minimum wage for fast food workers, she's yet to endorse the Fight for 15 cause. She's arguing for raising the federal minimum wage so that all workers are able to earn a living wage. She's yet to endorse that. She has endorsed raising the federal minimum wage when she's finally able to give an answer. She says it is $12. Step in the right direction, actually, but the truth is that if the minimum wage had kept pace with inflation, it would stand at $21.72. $12 is simply not enough. Can't do it. Now, the federal minimum wage has to be raised. We know that. The minimum wage is not the only issue facing the country, though. We're suffering under extreme economic stagnation, the national economic depression, and income inequality. So one of the most important issues related to economics and the economic depression is the question of the lack of jobs in and of itself. Decades of free trade and globalism, a race to the bottom, global race to the bottom. They've gutted the American economy. And of course, Hillary Clinton's come down precisely on the side of the free market, of Wall Street, of corporations, and the world oligarchy every time. When Hillary was merely the first lady and admittedly not officially in charge of making public policy, she supported NAFTA, nevertheless, and she assisted in promoting it from her position. 1996, she went and visited a gathering of unionized garment workers and said a most ridiculous thing. I think everybody is in favor of free and fair trade. I think NAFTA is proving its worth. That's what she said to their face. Now, during both her presidential campaigns, we hope one failed, we hope two fail, Clinton attempted to scale back her support of that agreement and that outsourced American jobs so fast it created a metaphorical traffic jam of companies exiting the country. But as recently as 2003, Clinton voiced clear support for the agreement. She actually was quite defiant about the existence of reality. Her book, Living History, she says, creating a free trade zone in North America, the largest free trade zone in the world, would expand U.S. exports, create jobs, and ensure that our economy was reaping the benefits, not the burdens, of globalization. Although unpopular with labor unions, expanding trade opportunities was an important administration goal, end quote. So, any doubts that she's expressed about the effectiveness of the NAFTA agreement are clearly not anything more than political posturing. She's banking on the short attention span and memory of the American public. It's an aspect of the voting population that has served her well enough over the last 2 decades. Clinton's support of the concept of free trade didn't end as First Lady, right? She continued as her tenure as New York Senator. She voted in favor of just about every single piece of legislation promoting free trade, nearly every free trade agreement that came her way. Clinton even stated on the floor of the Senate, 2005, quote, during my tenure as Senator, I voted for every free trade agreement that has come along before the Senate, and I believe that properly negotiated trade agreements can increase living standards, and foster openness and economic development for all parties, end quote. Now, she did vote against CAFTA that Bush proposed, but it was clearly, just a meaningless political posturing against an agreement that was going to pass anyway. She was able to remain somewhat untarnished in her anti-Bush economic platform for the election that the candidates were seeing coming up in 2008. So it was political posturing. Despite her vote on CAFTA, she did support in favor of a bilateral agreement with Chile, a free trade agreement between the two countries that removed tariffs and other trade barriers on agricultural and textile products. She voted in favor of a bilateral free trade agreement between the U.S. and Singapore and with Oman. She supported free trade agreements with Peru, with Jordan, Morocco, Australia. In 2005, she went to India and defended the outsourcing of U.S. jobs. Direct quote, she says, outsourcing will continue. There is no way to legislate against reality. We are not in favor of putting up fences, end quote. There's an article by Domenico Montanaro, who wrote for NPR, an article, A Timeline of Hillary Clinton's Evolution on Trade, that says 2007, this is what it points out, that Clinton called the South Korea deal inherently unfair. But in Seoul, South Korea, she said getting a South Korea deal done was a priority for me, for President Obama, and the entire administration. As she was Secretary of State, they determined to get it done, and that's they did their best to do that. In 2008, before the Pennsylvania primary, she was trying to woo white working class men, and she said that regarding the Colombia Free Trade Agreement, that she can do everything she could to urge the Congress to reject the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. But as Secretary of State, she promoted it, and that's what she did. She got that. She launched a big campaign to get that through. In her book, Hard Choices, she defended the practice of free trade over and over, and acknowledged that powers within the United States helped create the global economy. She also argued that the global economy was hindered by barriers placed in front of emerging and developing economies, meaning low-wage sweatshops and slave labor systems, from being able to enter the current global trading system. Here's a Clinton quote. America worked to create a global economy. The current global trading system is distorted not only by barriers to entry in developing and emerging economies, but by the power of special interest in developed countries, including the U.S., To make trade fairer as well as freer, developing countries have to do a better job of improving productivity, raising labor conditions, and protecting the environment. In the U.S., we have to do a better job of providing good jobs to those displaced by trade, end quote. So, not surprisingly, she has been a vocal advocate of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and in her position as Secretary of State, she has been instrumental in helping craft and negotiate and push through the final draft of the agreement, of which we know very little due to the fact that it was negotiated in secret and its terms have largely been kept secret as well. She was so heavily involved in the negotiation process of the TPP that former Obama advisor David Axelrod on MSNBC even said that Clinton had owned the process. Former National Security Advisor Susan Rice said that on an interview with Bloomberg TV that the TPP was one of Clinton's biggest achievements at the State Department. And Hillary Clinton has referred to the TPP as the gold standard in at least 45 different speeches. So she's no friend to America, no friend to labor, no friend to unions, no friend to working people in the United States. If that wasn't clear enough by now, hopefully that clarifies it a little more. Now, we also want to talk about the other issue here, another issue, domestic related, and that is something that might cause some controversy. Don't care. There was a recent massive increase, it seems, from the reports that I'm getting and the reports that other people are getting, and from what I've witnessed personally, regarding geoengineering and basically chemtrails. Regarding chemtrails, there's been a massive increase, right? Some are even referring to it as the geoengineering escalation of 2016. There's a good article by Cassius Kamarampi of the eraofwisdom.org website that's up at eraofwisdom.org and BrandonTurbeville.com because I'm interviewed in it. It's called The Geoengineering Escalation of 2016, Accounts of Chemtrail Flu Rise. And he's reporting the side effects of this increased spraying. And first I should go back and say that over the last few weeks we have seen a massive increase in the amount of chemtrails, not just the amount of times it's being done per week, but the amount of spray that has been launched over the skies. And it's actually causing physical reactions that are noticeable. It's not just a little sneeze here and there, not just a little bit of a cough, but it's much worse. Mental fog, fever, congestion, heart issues, itchy skin. A lot of people have been getting a lot of that as well. And in this article, Cassius goes over the various symptoms and the escalations that are taking place from across the country. And there's a verifiable history of U.S. government experimentation on citizens with biological creations. There's sprayed from airplanes, like the 1966 San Francisco spraying of bacteria on civilians, the 1955 Operation Dropkick, which released infected mosquitoes on black populations in Georgia and Florida, without knowledge or consent, of course. There's also many others. We've got people who have, been discussing the chemtrail issue for some time, and have actually seen and had these chemtrails analyzed, not the trails themselves, but the fallout of them, and they found a lot of toxic chemicals. I would refer you to a documentary called "What in the World Are They Spraying?" and then the subsequent follow-up, "Why in the World Are They Spraying?" It's a good documentary. Now, the article shows you a number of videos of some chemtrails that have been taking place in Sacramento, California, and they're pretty bad. But what I've witnessed here in South Carolina have been horrible. I haven't seen this amount of chemtrails since 2.5, maybe 3 years ago, and this was a major escalation in the amount. Some people are reporting an extremely distinct smell. I've never personally been able to notice any odor from them, but this is the same. I'm getting the same reports from a lot of people out west. Generally, they're saying they smell starchy. They burn the nose, a bit metallic, kind of like a hospital smell. I don't have that experience, but they do cause itching and burning nose, right? They do cause headaches. They actually cause fevers, extreme congestion, and pain, like joint pain, and that type of thing. You can go look this up on the website. It's there on the website that you can go check it out and look for yourself. But enough with the chemtrail denying. It's real enough, and people now who deny it are really just doing themselves a disservice by ignoring it. It's clearly real. You can clearly go look at the sky and see that for yourself. Now, I've got a minute and a half left. Let me address another wedge issue that's coming up, right? Since we're in the Carolinas, the new civil rights movement, the new March on Washington should apparently be about the North Carolina bathroom bill. This bathroom bill that would have mandated that women use women's bathrooms and men use men's bathrooms. How horrible. The bathroom bill is being considered an anti-LGBT bill. Of course, L, G, and B are not mentioned at all in the bill, so it's not an anti-LGBT bill. At worst, it's an anti-T bill. The idea here was that the state of North Carolina passed a law that would have required government buildings, not private ones, that private ones can make their own policies, but government buildings should have women using women's bathrooms and men using men's bathrooms. And this is, of course, based on your biological sex at birth, right? Because that is something that humans have always recognized as your sex or gender since the beginning of human civilization. Only in the last 5 years or so have we been able to pick our own gender or pick our own gender. It was actually not the state of North Carolina that initiated this process. It was a law that was brought about because the city of Charlotte, I do believe, their city council wanted to make a law that would have allowed individuals who were not of the same sex to use that bathroom, the bathrooms there. So the state law was actually a response to the city law that was trying to be passed, so it could have an actual state policy that was available for cities to follow. We're sorry, this is not a civil rights issue here. The idea of allowing men to use women's bathroom is not a civil rights issue. This is a mass delusion. It's the idea that surgery changes your gender that you were born with, that you have surgery and now you're a woman, as any other natural born woman would be. This should actually be offensive to women, but we won't get into that debate. But suffice this to say, this is not a civil rights issue. We're not really concerned about it. It's funny, businesses and performers can pull out of North Carolina because of their personal beliefs, but others are forced to bake cakes, and we're not a fan of that. If we want equality, we should have equality, and anything else is not true equality. So perhaps we'll make comments on that. But enough with the social justice warrior insanity. Enough with all of this. This time for the world, and especially this country, to stop embracing delusions as reality. You have a right to be who you want to be and express yourself however you want to express yourself. That is your right. You should always be treated with respect. But the majority of the population should not be forced to engage in a mass delusion because of your disorder. So we are going to leave it at that. We're going to perhaps talk more about that in the future, but we'll see. There's a lot of other pressing issues other than this. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.